Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. So, first and foremost, I wanted to talk to you guys about a few things that I have coming up at the end of this week to plug in if you are interested. And so, we will dive into our lung and respiratory system in our series to care in just a second. But I did want to give you the chance to be able to know a little bit more about some of the things that we have going on. And so I am doing a collaboration with 4 other coaches for a webinar for the Real Healthy Housewives on Friday. And so that is going to give you an opportunity to basically have like a one-on-one session with all 5 of us coaches, answering questions that you think are applicable to you in your journey. A lot of times when we have webinars, we sign up for these things and we go, is this something really that I want to do? Is this something that is going to be applicable to me in my journey? And so that webinar is actually going to give you the opportunity to fill out questions prior to the webinar occurring, and then those questions are submitted directly to the coach itself, and we will answer any and all those questions during the talk itself. And so you'll have access to replays on that one and lifetime availability to go back in and watch it. It is all day on Friday, so every 2 hours starting at 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. And so if you can't make some of those, you can always watch the replay. We will go back in for the next week afterwards and answer any questions that you might have based off of the talks that we give as well. And so do know that that's only $37, and so you can access that. I'll put the link down below for that one. And then I have one more thing that I wanted to talk to you about, which is this Saturday. And so it is the first time I will be doing a meal prep with me, and it is an hour-long class on Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning. And it's going to give you the opportunity to make 1 breakfast, 1 lunch, and 1 dinner. And then I'm going to give you different ways that you can take all 3 of these and change them around to make it to where you can utilize them throughout the rest of the week without having to cook. And so that is going to be the key for success in a lot of ways. I feel like everybody always asks me about meal prep, and they say, well, how do you do it? And what does it look like? And, what are you doing in the kitchen, and what do you eat? And so I'm going to give you 3 of my family favorites. So egg white cups, these lovely chicken parmesan, and parchment paper to make sure that they stay moist and wonderful all week long. You can season those up different ways. And then I'm going to also do a pumpkin chili. So I think that's very festive and of the season. You'll also get a bonus when you sign up for the Meal Prep With Me class. I have a holiday rewrapping your leftovers, which will take all of your sides that you have made for Thanksgiving and your turkey and all of those things, and give you great options of how you can plug those in and put them into something else, to where the next week after Thanksgiving you do not have to cook, but you have all the leftovers turned into new meals to make it easier for you not to have waste or boredom in what you're consuming. So those are the 2 ways that I have this week to plug in with me. I will put the links down below. If you are interested in those, you can always DM me if you have more questions. I'm completely okay with that as well. So without further ado, let us get back to our respiratory system. So quick recap last week. So we went over the top part of the respiratory system, talking about how it was similar to the digestive system in regards to starting out at the mouth and then going down and in the throat, how we have the 2 different pipes, the esophagus and then the trachea, which is the windpipe, and making sure that those things don't get confused to where we have, choking hazards or things like that. And then how, of course, the esophagus goes down into the stomach and the trachea goes into the lungs. And so that's what we're going to kind of really focus in on today, is more lung care, okay? And so lung infections, like any other infections of the body, can be bacterial, viral, or fungal, okay? If you have a lung infection, it's going to feel very symptomatic to other things that you probably have. I'm not a doctor, but it does feel very similar to like flu-like symptoms. You're going to have, body ache, runny nose, fever, fatigue, potentially wheezing, a cough with thick mucus. And so remember last week we talked about that a little bit, and how we have these mucous membranes all in our nose, and then they go back and down and into our our throat, and then actually and into the lungs as well. And that mucus is supposed to be catching everything before it gets down and into the lungs. But sometimes we have, some little pesky germs and they get down into here, okay? And so I want to show you a picture of that actually. So when we look at the lung, this is kind of what it looks like. And so that windpipe is the trachea that we talked about last week. And we talked about how it had ridges like this to where it doesn't collapse in on itself, right? And so those ridges are actually cartilage, the same thing that's made out of your nose and your ears. So then that way when you take those big, deep breaths, it doesn't, close up. It's got, support. It's sturdy, okay? And so the thing is with this is, so we have the trachea and then that goes down into the bronchi. So these bigger branches are bronchi, and then the smaller ones in here, these are called bronchioles, okay? And so from the bronchioles, they divide down into even smaller alveoles. And so when you look at this, the best way to kind of picture your lung and the happenings of taking, that oxygenated blood and then, taking the carbon dioxide out and putting oxygenated blood back in, that's what's happening with our lungs and allowing us to breathe, is that they look kind of like a tree, okay? And so the best way to remember this is that this is your broccoli, and then your little clusters here where the transformation of the oxygen and the CO2 go back and forth. This is called alveoli, but a lot of times we remember it with ravioli. So ravioli and broccoli. And so the reason why I even bring this up is because I do teach health and wellness at a local academy here in my area. And so we are doing the systems of the body just like we are doing here on the Wellness Wednesday. And so I had a lovely student tell me that trick. And so don't think that the kids can't teach you something too, because I think that was a great way to remember that. I will always remember broccoli and ravioli. And so I hope you do too. Do know that when infection comes down and gets into the mucus and goes down into those, bronchi tubes, this is where we get the term bronchitis. Okay, so bronchitis is basically an inflammation of the tubes because there's some type of infection going on in there. And so when you know the anatomy of your body, it's very easy for you to be able to understand where the terms are coming for and the reason why different things are called different ways. Okay, and so bronchitis, of course, is an inflammation of the bronchi. And so if you know that there are bronchi in your lungs, it makes it easier for you to understand what bronchitis is, okay? Asthma is actually the narrowing of airwaves. So the ones that actually go down in, so your bronchioles and down into the alveoli, those airways can get narrow. And so this, of course, is something that a lot of times you are born with, asthma, or you could potentially, occur later on due to environmental conditions. So we talk about people with asthma have a harder time breathing when it's cold outside, which makes sense because it's harder for your body to convert, and which is one of the reasons why, we do have a system of it's not going straight into our lungs, but going into our mouth and down our trachea and into the bronchiole, is to warm that. When we think about, running when it's really cold outside and you feel like you get that burn, because the air is so cold that you didn't have enough time for your body to heat it up before it got down into the lungs, okay? And so that's kind of your correlation in with asthma. Some of the other common conditions that you hear with lungs are COPD, which is like chronic obstruction pulmonary disease. And you also have emphysema, lung cancer, and pneumonia, okay? And so pneumonia is just an infection of those alveoli, so of the air sacs. And so know that, of course, like everything else, making sure that we stay, hand sanitize, that we do all of those things like that to kind of limit the chance of having sickness. But it is something that kind of happens sometimes. And then, knowing, as we've talked about them through the other systems as well, that you are, going to have to just kind of muster through and fight through. We talked about, potentially if you're doing Trim Healthy Mama, some singing canaries, some Baobab, make sure that you have lots of rest and recovery. In my fitness group this past week, we talked about, coming back from breaks and making sure that you give yourself enough time to do that, not coming back in and hitting strong, especially when we talk about respiratory issues. We did that last week too, when we talk about anything that's like from here up, you could probably still be okay to work out, but if you're feeling anything from here down, it's good to take a rest, making sure that you're not making that worse, unfortunately. Okay, other ways to kind of keep those lungs nice and healthy, of course, is to not smoke. Common sense there on that one. I won't beat a dead horse on that one. But another thing is to make sure that you're exercising to breathe harder. Okay, so a lot of times when we exercise, we might not get out of breath, but when you think about your lungs and conditioning them, you have to be breathless to push them to a point of fatigue to where they're going to grow. Same thing happens when we talk about, muscular conditioning, or we talk about respiratory health. All of those things, they need to be pushed past a point of comfort to make sure that you are growing those systems, okay? And so you want to make sure that your exercise does involve some type of deep breathing, something to where you are somewhat out of breath, because that's what's going to allow them to be taxed enough to create the change, okay? We also want to avoid pollutants. It's kind of like the smoking. We don't want to ingest them in, right? You want to breathe deeply. And so a lot of times you have shallow breaths just normally. We don't think about having deep breaths. We don't think about inhaling all of the air out of your lungs and then expelling all of the air out. But if you can take a few moments every day to kind of practice this, and this could be something really, really easy, like, hey, I'm about to go into work, let me just take a few deep breaths. And it could be, I know my iWatch, has those deep breath moments that it tings me, and it's like, hello, it's time for deep breathing. And a lot of times I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't got time for that, but if you could put the deep breathing in and on a habit that that you always do. And so maybe it's your morning coffee when you first get up. And before you take your morning coffee, you just need to do a few deep breaths. And so this is actually relaxation technique as well. And so in one of my groups that I handle too, that's what we're going over this month is, blessed to be stressed. And so having those deep breath moments just to allow yourself to kind of reflect and have everything that's swirling around in craziness, kind of push out when you expel out the air in your lungs. And so this is great for the respiratory system, but also for your mental health too. And so I encourage you to kind of increase those deep breathing routines. And so maybe it's at night, right before you go to sleep, you get into bed and you just inhale as much as you can and exhale all of the air completely and entirely out of the lungs, okay? So that's allowing them to be able to expand and contract. And then the other thing is just to stay hydrated with any system of the body. Of course, it's going to work a little bit more efficiently if we have good hydration going on. So that, in a nutshell, is the respiratory system. So I hope you will remember to make sure and keep your broccoli and your ravioli in check. Make sure that you have nice, healthy things that you are incorporating into your systems and your routines to make sure that you are taking the best care of the body that the Lord created us to have. Next week, we're going to take a break from our systems to care, and I will have a Thanksgiving-themed session just for you. So if you want to hear anything about staying on plan Thanksgiving, if you want to hear anything about specifics, let me know in the comments below and I can add that into the chat. But it will be somewhat of a surprise next week, so stay tuned. And if you are interested in any of the opportunities that I gave and mentioned earlier, do know that there will be a link for those below as well. But I hope you all have a blessed rest of your week, and I will see you guys soon.